one cam for the Rollei 35AF. So it's been many months now that I've started testing this camera. So I did it pretty extensively. As you can see from the marks, I've kind of beaten it a little bit. It's got a few bumps. I didn't voluntarily test its solidity. I really used it as an everyday camera when I was traveling around, and we'll see what the films after. So basically, that was a try to resuscitate the tradition of those Rollei 35 cameras. A few models of those really compact cameras with the lens you would rotate and come and pull out and then lock. Here it doesn't move; it's fixed. It's autofocus, which was not the case with the older ones. As you can see, the build feels a little bit plasticky, but at first, but then it's kind of robust, so it's okay. It actually feels pretty well in hand once you get used to it. You have this plastic rim. As you can see here, it's not very straight because I kind of, when you hit it a little bit, it will tend to how do you say, retract a little bit, but it doesn't affect the lens per se. And I was able to force it back out once. I think it's more of a construction problem and a lack of resistance to small shocks. But you have a 35mm f2.8 lens. Wasn't able to really know the history of that lens. Maybe some of you can find some more information online. It says Rollei Lens, doesn't really make... I wasn't really sure who designed the lens, really. There seems to be other cameras online, other projects that rely on the same architecture, and they're not Rollei, so I'm kind of curious about that. We'll see if those other cameras come out once, one of these days. Otherwise, the front panel is kind of simple. You have this rotary dial for aperture, which is great. You have another dial here for exposition, so you can either put it automatic, you can compensate exposure, you have the speed, manual speed if you want. Really cool. Honestly, didn't really use it much, but when you need it, it works. On front of both dials, you have something that doesn't set any value, but you can just, it shows values, it's just a memo. You can say how many, what's the length of your film on one side and what type of film on the other. That can be cool. I didn't really use it myself. I tend to stick to Scotch on the back, the brand and the markings from the film I put inside. Otherwise, the viewfinder window here, the flash here, probably the lidar underneath here, and you have this small, that's probably for a low light situation, a light generating diode here, or simply for the lidar, I don't know. And here a button that actually is the self-timer and can also serve something else, but when you put it in self-timer mode, you press on it, it stays red, and when you press, it's going to start blinking to medium speed, then at a faster speed, and then really fast speed, and then take the picture here. While you don't have a film inside, you will have some trouble moving the rewind lever and things like that. You really need to have the tension of the film inside. That was kind of tricky at first when I started testing it, because you can't do that otherwise if you don't have either the button halfway pressed, and that's a lot dependent on the film inside. Anyhow, on the front panel, nothing much more to say. Lateral panels, as you can see, I lost this screw, and spontaneously the other screw. So not a really good design in that sense, but I didn't feel any, doesn't seem it's coming out. So I'll need to find some of those screws another time. Haven't unscrewed them myself, that's for sure. Otherwise, the back panel, interesting stuff. Well, you have the rewind lever here, which will work weirdly, as I said, if the film is not in or if the film is not under tension. So it's really important to put your film well inside the spool, the uptaking spool. You have the battery compartment here, which is kind of weird. Everything kind of feels plasticky, by the way. It kind of feels bad at first, but this one's kind of troublesome to get out. And you have a CR2 battery inside. I don't know if that's just particular to my camera. I just was able, when I was doing the French version, to do it pretty simply, but this time it doesn't go out. Well, it's not that complicated to get it out. Here, I got it. You have a CR2 battery inside. It's kind of flimsy made. I think it gets stuck really because of this tape here. Actually, we'll take it off. It's kind of annoying. And here, took me months to take it off, so I finally did it, and you're witnesses to it. The battery, we'll talk about it during my examples, while showing the examples. Here you have a lever that you pull up in order to let the spool be free to rewind once the film is finished. So don't forget to put it back on when you put a new film. The top panel, obviously important. You have different modes. So off, you have a no flash setting here, and you have this small OLED screen, which is pretty cool actually. Kind of small, but when you press it tells you how many photos you took and gives you indication of your over or under exposure. And yep, here we took a picture. I can rewind up. You can go without or with flash. I actually kind of like that rotary style switch. And then ISO, and with the ISO button you can actually press on the self-timer button to change manually the ISO. It is DX compatible too, so it was kind of useful. I wish they may have put a button or used the ISO button to enable focusing to infinite, because I really had some trouble with the lidar through windows in certain circumstances. And yeah, we'll see during the picture review part of this video. And that's about it here. This button also tends to be, when you put your camera in the pocket, tends to go on an on mode. It doesn't consume a lot, but you will empty a battery if it happens to you more than once. Here, the back panel, we went through it. With those two LEDs, not very useful to me. They indicate if you're over or under exposing, or if there's any other trouble. Yeah, it blinks, it's red, it's green. Not very useful for me, again. Didn't find it very informative. And the underneath panel, you have this weird rotary thing, which actually, a little bit like you had on those older Rollei, once you put it in a certain position, you can open the back panel. So let's do that. You can slide it off. That's how you charge the, you'll see an example just after. And this, you put the film here, well, the other way around, you put it in the spool. The spool system is kind of weird. And then you cover the film just to maintain pressure, tension, and then you could put that back on. So sometimes it blocks. Here it seems to be okay, and then you lock it up. Again, plasticky, but it works. Same for the lever, the rewind lever. It works pretty well, apart from it being very uncomfortable for your thumb. Feels plasticky too, but I think actually after using it quite a few times, it's probably pretty resistant. It's got a nice magnet thing for the lever to stay put inside. What else? Your stand screw mount is here. Nothing very special. And that's about it. So yeah, let's go maybe see some examples and talk a little bit more. Oh yeah, sorry about the cap. The lens cap, didn't really like it. Kind of useful. It just goes on. It's felt, so it kind of fits. But if you just give it a push, it just will leave. So I almost lost it maybe 100 times. They could have just done something where you just could slide it in one way and would stay a little bit more locked, but they didn't do it, so it's kind of half useful. I didn't like it. But yeah, let's go check the pictures taken with it. and the first two pictures, very boring pictures, but these were done with a Kodak Color 200 ISO. But it already gives you an idea of the geometry and this overall style of the lens. Had difficulties finding the details about the design of the lens. I mean, the history of it. But yeah, it's written Rollei Lens. Not really sure about it, but what we can see is the proximal bokeh is pretty good on the right. It's kind of nice and smooth. The focus seems okay. The detail don't seem to be very, very crisp, even in the middle of the lens. But overall, it's the rendering's pretty good, and the exposure is good. And that's something here to more pictures. Exposure on this camera is basic flawless, shall I say that? Maybe it could be more precise in certain circumstances, but it's very, very robust. So you will rarely, if never, have an underexposed picture or an overexposed picture. And my settings were basically almost all the time automatic for exposure and full opening at 2.8 on the other dial. So as you can see, as I was saying, the geometry is not perfectly straight, but it's really near, and the rendering overall is really nice. Those are scenes in Geneva. Again, here on the left, the scene on the lake. I'm going to stop pretty fast talking about exposure because it basically always works. But you can see also this was such a basic film how interesting first of all the focus looks pretty good. A lot of the times it's this lidar system where basically a laser gives the indication of the distance and the focus is there's a coupling of the focus to that distance. Kind of works pretty well in most situations, but you see actually on the picture on the right that there's a small, probably pincushion, I guess. At least I have that feel. And you have an idea also of the depth of field with the bokeh, the front bokeh on the first bike. But yeah, the colors also, the rendering of the colors through the lens, really nice. Here the picture on the left, it was a good opportunity to see the ghost image on the bottom right of the lens construction with the sun coming straight in. And again, it's the size of this camera, the way it handles. At first it felt a little bit like a toy, but at least I got pretty fast used to having it in my hand and enjoying it. Let's be clear. The LiDAR system, photo on the right, if you forget that it seems to focus on the center part of your framing. For example, here was the flash in those pigeons. I'm completely off. Exposure is still okay. Again, it does work even with the flash, which is pretty powerful. But I was starting to have troubles since the beginning with the focus. Here I'm going to black and white. That's Ilford Delta 3200 ISO film. So I tried a more sensitive film to see if faster exposures, shorter exposures would have problem, how the camera handled it. Again, exposure flawless in that case. Actually, with this film in particular, was it because it was black and white or I don't know. This film was really great overall. And one thing, the films that you have to also think about, I will talk a little bit more about it after, but the loading mechanism is kind of weird. If you don't read the manual, the first time I put a film in it, I kind of attached it badly to the loading spool. And basically you need tension to be able to wind the film. It's kind of a weird thing. And once you wound the film, the trigger for taking the picture is mechanically linked to film being wound. So it's kind of a weird thing. So please load the film, read the manual if you get one, and load the film correctly as indicated, even so it's kind of cumbersome. Anyhow, as you can see, the geometry works great. Slight pincushion, as I was saying before. And for most street photography situations, focus went well with the LiDAR. Again, here that's two pictures in Manchester, one by daytime, the other by night. Works, and as you can see with the lights, the high contrast situation, the lens really reacts well. I really like the rendering of that lens. It's not the most qualitative lens ever, but it's yeah, works. Again, 2 pictures by night, still in Manchester, street photography on the left. Slow shutter speed, basically, even so the film is pretty sensitive. But it works, and in this bar, the focus is correct. Exposure, again, even with this film and those light levels, works. Again, here, a picture in a restaurant. Most of the time, the focus with the lidar is perfectly fine. But then there's the first problem that comes up here. For example, on the right, really incredible scene. I do have pictures with other cameras. If you follow my other series, you've probably seen them. But there was no way for me to focus to infinity. There's a dirty window. The lidar automatically focuses on the window. No way to pass through. And that's really disturbing because actually even with clean glasses, depending on the reflectivity index, I guess, your focus is going to get stuck on the window and you have no way of forcing infinity. Just that would have been nice. And I think it's kind of a missed opportunity because the on-off button, which is basically on with flash, and a third position, fourth position where it's manual ISO override, they could have forced, maybe in the firmware, forced infinity distance if you're in the mode where you set the ISO, because you can still trigger the shutter when you're in that mode, but it just goes to a non-flash mode. So it could have, that's a missed opportunity, because I think it would, for example, here I had no ways of pre-focusing on infinity because the only way to infinity was through the window. So I never was able to take the picture with this film. Anyhow, exposure being really well set automatically by this camera, you can go for really long exposures without too much trouble. And that's in a bar in Manchester. I was doing some experiments. So I basically keep my photo stable on what I want to take a picture of, and when I believe it's going to be the end of the exposure, I kind of move around to give it this look. Worked. So a really nice camera to experiment with. And actually, at least I felt really getting used to having it in my pocket. It's pretty light. The form factor is nice. The on-off button is well situated. Everything works pretty well. It's kind of an enjoyable camera. And then when you're more static and don't move as much and don't experiment too much, low light exposure, great. So yeah, and the high contrast rendering of the lens is great. So here, both photos are in different places in Reykjavik, the nightlife, the DJ on one side, this cocktail bar on the other. Yeah, really a great camera to be in those kind of situations. The focusing mechanism is really noisy. I've seen many videos where people say, oh, it's okay and whatever. If you're in a low noise situation, let's say a jazz concert or whatever, where the level of sound is really low, this thing makes a huge amount of noise and it's not going to work. So that's a big downside. But otherwise, in high noise situation, high sound level situations, it's great. Again, here's a picture on the left. I took it because I do believe I was fully open with the lens, but still had the problem that it doesn't look like the diaphragm is round. So I don't know if I had moved the button slightly but I just wanted to show that's with flash, the snowflakes. And basically, sometimes you might have some trouble. It also gives you an indication of how the diaphragm looks like. It's not very regular when it's not fully open. So yeah, that's maybe a downside. Yeah, anyways. But by night, again, on the right, that tennis court under the snow gives you an idea of how well this system does compensate for exposure. Let's go back to some color film, maybe a little bit more sensitive with Flick Film Aurora 800 ISO. Very special colors with this film. Here's at the west coast of Reykjavik. Gives an indication of how it works in panoramic mode, landscape mode. Again, it's not the most defined lens ever, but it works great. Really old school, but great color rendering. Yeah, nothing much else to say. Here on the left, again, the lidar, the focus goes well. Even so, I'm not fully to infinity. Looks great. Nothing to say. Just does the job. On the right, that's where the problems kind of arise. There are a few problems which kind of are annoying with this camera because you don't really know when they're going to come. Basically, the winding lever will sometimes not fully wind. And then you have no way of partially winding to compensate. And because the trigger to trigger your photos is linked mechanically to the winding being set, whatever that means, sometimes you will have to overexpose parts of a photo. And that's really hard to understand because in my case, I've really used it I didn't let it be completely still and super protected all the time. I had it in my pocket. So sometimes it probably bumped. It probably moved a lot, but not excessively. And I think the mechanism for winding sometimes, if the tension is released, will set itself to having to rewind or just, I don't know. But anyways, you will have probably one of those partial multi-exposures. And that's kind of a shame if you have a really great picture, which is not the case here. But if you have a really great picture and the next one is kind of stuck, you're going to overexpose your great picture. Here again, 2 pictures, which shows that it works even with strong backlights. The lidar does pretty well its job. On the right, the picture, I kind of like this one because you see this semicircular blue aura on the top part of the picture. That's kind of one of the qualities, let's say one of the default of this lens. Very subtle. You don't really see it. It's kind of fine. And that's really a high contrast situation. So in some ways, even so it's by night, but just to give you an example of what this lens can sometimes generate as ghost image or auras. But otherwise by nighttime, as you can see on the left, high contrast, still between the geometry, the color rendering, there's no real glow. It's a really nice lens. On the right, I know I took this picture with flash, so it doesn't really affect the picture because everything's too far away. The flash is pretty powerful nonetheless. Here it's just a picture that shows that by nighttime it does do its job. Not the flash, but the exposure. Here again, a picture of the west coast of Reykjavik. Gives you an idea of the geometry, the bokeh on the forefront with those soccer goals. And then we go to 2 pictures which show different kinds of problems. The one on the left is one that I kind of find very disturbing because even with the simplest scenes, sometimes the focus with the lidar will not work correctly. And because the scene is kind of really simple, it's hard to understand why it didn't focus where it should. And that happened regularly. Not a lot, but still. And it's really hard to know because at least if the situation, you could understand why it didn't focus correctly, you would do two shots if the photo is important. But here you really have no clue. And on the right, I wanted to take a picture with flash. And the switch on top of the camera, which lets you select with or without flash, is a little bit clumsy. And here I was in an intermediary position, so the flash didn't activate. So that's also a little problem. But the exposure was right, was good anyhow, and the photo is kind of funny, but nothing more. But just that could have been a little bit better designed. Let's go to a different film. Let's go to expired film. So that's a 200 ISO film from 20 years ago. So I compensated it. So I put 50 ISO automatic. The brand is Extra. I don't know what kind of film is actually inside, but here are the results. Here are 2 pictures that just give you also an example of the power of the flash. So the flash is really quite powerful for the size of it. And as you can see on the picture on the left, it's pretty far away. It really compensates well. Good automatic exposure with the flash. The one on the right, it's closer. Works. And again, here the lidar did its job. Focus is fine, exposure is fine, and the overall quality of the rendering is great. Sometimes, like on the picture on the left, the focus not really pinpoint on, but I think it's more me not focusing on the right part of the image, knowing it's really more centered than what my main subject, who was the cone, is. And yeah, the flash works well. Slightly, the position of the flash is not totally straight, so you will have slightly, but it's not as bad as could be on other cameras, so it's totally acceptable. And on the right, it's just to show that sometimes when you go through a window, that's through the plane window, the focus, it will go to infinity. So it's really a question of, I don't know what actually, but it was kind of a problem for me because really more than half of the pictures I wanted to take through a window didn't work, but this one did work. So let's show it. Again, with flash, the flash works well at a distance, closer. The lidar does its job most of the time. I actually kind of like the lidar idea, even so there's some flaws, which could have been resolved with an manual override. But here on the left, as you can see, with this sort of weird scene with the branches, it's hard to know where the lidar is going to choose the focus. It shows it a little bit in the middle, but yeah, anyway, it was a complicated scene. And on the right, the focus is okay. Even by night, with the flash, everything works well. But here again, two examples of this, what I was saying before. Simple scenes, simple distances. I was wondering if in those two pictures, the fact that I have a central strong light, which is kind of white, maybe the ATM machine or this neon display, which is empty, does that disturb the lidar? It's a possibility, but you have no idea if it's wrong in the focus or not. You hear the lens move, so you can kind of guess where it's going, but if it's really close or really far, but you will get used to this weird noise when you can't get through a window and won't take the picture, but otherwise it's kind of hard. And then this camera, you really get used to it. I really got used to it. I really started enjoying it, having it in my pocket. It's kind of light. The form factor is good. It feels good. So here was an experimental film, which is the new Harman Red film, 125 ISO. Very interesting results, and I actually really enjoyed it. That's the last film I did with this camera. When I really started getting used to all its quirks and everything, and I really felt it was more of a tool, and really great to take pictures in the streets, and the rendering of the lens is really controllable. Here are two pictures in the nature of Iceland. The ones before were in Geneva and the Geneva Rad. As you can see, this film really has some really interesting rendering because it's very sensitive to red, but the white lines, that's me. So the big artifacts, that's me manipulating the stuff. But you see what the lens gives, and if you're into experimental photography, this lens is kind of interesting, and the camera itself is really enjoyable to use. You will appreciate it. And here again, with the exposure, with this weird film, which renders colors very differently, you will get some really interesting results. I really like that camera at the end. So yeah, kind of surprising. And here again, two pictures, same film. Again, those linear artifacts, that's my manipulation of the film. But you can really get some interesting results using this camera and have them with the pleasure of using a tool, which makes sense. So anyways, let's go to maybe the conclusion. The plus. What did I like most with the camera? So basically the lens character. I didn't expect that, but it's really like the results of this lens combination, of this formula. The really solid, reliable auto exposure, great. Really loved also the fact that I could go to manual speed or automatic plus or minus 2 aperture compensations. The manual aperture, great. Most of the time I was fully open, but still, it's so nice to have that as an option, which is well designed. Of course, it inspired itself from the old camera, but still works great. And then the flash settings mechanism. The fact that you have a small lever on top, which is on with flash, it's clear, it's simple, it's really nice. It's actually really nice to use like this because you know what you're doing. It's not the gimmicky stuff where you push some button more than once or whatever to turn on or off or look at the LED, whatever. Simple, works. Plus. The viewfinder size, large, clear. Okay, yeah, and the framing was most of the time what I expected, so well done. The form factor of the body itself is really nice. It's it's slightly larger than the original Rollei 35, but you don't need to get the lens out, and even so it's slightly more bulky. It's a good size. It's nice. It's nice to hold. The flash power, great. More power than I expected from a small flash like this, and really again the exposure perfect. So solidity, I did use it. Like I wasn't overly attentive to try not to hit it, or I always had it in my pocket. I really worked with it like I would with another camera. I'm careful, but I wasn't going to be overly careful just for the sake of it. I needed to test it. So it's got a few bumps, it's got a few scratches, but solid enough. The OLED screen design on top, which indicates at what exposure you are, and if you're over or under exposing, really great. It's just tiny, a little tiny, too tiny, but actually you didn't really use it, but when you need to use it, you have it, works. Yeah, great design, simple, works. Then the pluses, basic pluses. Self-timer indicator, which blinks at 3 levels, 3 speeds of blinking when you get closer to taking the picture. Maybe the mechanism is a little bit flimsy, but nice indicator. The wind lever feel, I never would have expected it would feel good, but after being more confident about how I put my film inside and the mechanism, I understood how the mechanism worked. I really liked the wind lever feel. Yeah, nice. Battery use, it lasts a lot. I had a problem once where the camera was in my pocket and was on, and I was constantly pressing, I think, on the button, so it emptied the battery, but I still did 3 or 4 films before, and then I had a second battery which never expired. So really, there's an auto off system, which is also a plus. That basically does the job. I wish the on-off button could have a lock, but anyways. Film indication dials on front of both the rotary dials for aperture and speed. You have the possibility to indicate what kind of film you have loaded in your camera. Old school, but it's nice to have it. And then I liked there's the magnetic system to fold in the rewind lever that's under the camera. Just works. Great. Nothing more. Then the stuff that you expect that was just okay. The overall look, nothing really exceptional. It looks a little bit like the older one, kind of a brick, small brick. The ISO override, yeah, it's nice to have it. It's also nice to have the auto ISO, the DX code system, because if you have a film which has DX coding, it's just simple, you put it in. But the ISO override works. It's nice to have it. You really like having it. Actually, maybe I could have put it in plus, because in some cameras from the old time where you couldn't do that, it's kind of annoying. The camera opening mechanism is kind of, yeah, it works, but I don't know. I'm not a fan. The release of the spool lever works. Once you're finished with the film, you have to press the button to release the spool. Yeah, nothing special. Then we go to the negative stuff. No multi-exposure, that's kind of a negative. It could have been nice for a camera like this. The feel of the shutter button, I really didn't like it, but I just put one negative because it really feels plasticky. It feels weird. It's not really nice. Same for the battery compartment mechanism. It's not as important, but it's really hard to get the battery out, and it's kind of annoying. It feels really plasticky. I did lose both screws on top of the body. I have no idea when or why. Probably vibrations. That's kind of negative. But at the same time, the body doesn't seem to open. Doesn't really need it. I don't know. I'll try to find some screws, but I didn't have any problem with the loss of the screws. The plasticky feel, that's negative. Even so, the top part and the bottom part of the body are in metal. It still feels plasticky overall, which is a little sad. Then negative. The winding mechanism, as we saw some examples, really annoying, not knowing when the camera is going to decide to overexpose partially an image. That's a problem. Hard to load the film. Even so, once you understood the way to do it, it's still annoying. We know how to make mechanisms to load film correctly. I think that's kind of a bummer. I do load a lot of films in a lot of cameras, and that's one of the worst experience I do have with a camera. Then the half-pressed trigger to shutter when you're loading the film. So when you want to advance the film, you have to press halfway the trigger to be able to move the winding lever. It's annoying. It's part of the loading the film thing. Really annoying. The lens cap mechanism, I put it negative because it's basically the lens cap goes well on top, but if you move a little too much, it will just detach. There could have been a really easy way of just maybe doing a mechanism to kind of lock it in place by slightly rotating it once on the lens. That's not what happens. It just stays on really slightly, and most of the time you're thinking about not losing it. And then the rewind lever, the feel, it's terrible. It hurts your thumb, or it's hard to hold. It's hard to rotate. It works, but it's really a terrible feel. And then the negative. Lack of manual focus. That's really annoying on this camera because it could have been a really great camera with manual focus for street photography. Really unreliable focus in certain simple situations, as we saw with the examples. It's hard to know when it's going to happen, at least if you could predict, but really hard to know. There's no option for infinite focus. That's really sad because with the Windows, it doesn't work well. Again, I really say my experience is more than once out of two window, my focus will not go through. You will hear the lens focusing close, so you will not, after a while, you will not take the picture, but it's super annoying. And then the price, it's really super expensive for what it is. If you look at, I mean, it's kind of subjective, but it's expensive. It would be nicer if it was 1/3 less the price that it is now when this review comes out. Would be more in the range of what you would expect. But anyhow, hopefully that was entertaining, informative. If you have questions, suggestions, again, don't hesitate, and catch you next time.